You've always wanted a way to support the Classic Metal Show. Well, now you've got a way. With the Classic Metal Show subscription service, you can rent or buy the in-studio video episodes of the Classic Metal Show featuring Neely and Chris Aiken. You can also subscribe to our monthly service, which grants unlimited access to all current and archived in-studio videos. Your subscription will allow viewing on most devices, including iOS, Android, Roku, Chromecast, and most smart TVs. Visit www.vimeo.com/on-demand/CMS Studio and support the Classic Metal Show by starting your Classic Metal Show subscription today. It is your Classic Metal Show right here on theclassicmetalshow.com. That, of course, Ozzy from Diary of a Madman. That is You Can't Kill Rock and Roll. And on the line right now and in the video form is a guy that definitely didn't kill rock and roll, but made it great for me and about, I would say 150 million other people that definitely have. It's funny, I was joking earlier that anybody that is a metal fan from the 80s and through the early 90s probably has 50 records in their collection that have your name on it. Of course, I'm talking with the producer, Max Norman. Max, how are you, man?
I'm excellent. Thank you very much. Yes. How are you?
I'm good, man. Do you agree with me that anybody that is a metal fan has, well, maybe not 50, but at least 20?
Yeah, 50 is a bit of a stretch, I think, as I probably only made about 60, 70 records. So 50 would be a very, a generous figure. But yeah, I would think that during that time, there was a lot of bands in that same genre.
Sure.
And, Mustaine, Megadeth, Ozzy, and, Lynch Mob, a whole bunch of bands there that, probably everybody was into.
Sure.
So they would be automatically sort of buying these kind of records. So.
Sure.
You're probably right, yeah.
And you know what? That is such a good place to be. I mean, as I'm sure you're aware, there's a lot of guys that produce music, but there's not a lot that have whatever it is that you have. And I don't know that I know what it is. To be honest, I'm going to kind of doubt that you know what it is specifically that makes people want to work with you. You know, there's something about the tone and the sound of your records that is very distinct, and it really it supersedes who's performing the music. I mean, you can listen to Ozzy records that were not produced by you and know that they're not you.
Okay, so to take it in order.
Okay.
No, I don't really know what it is, except that it's what I want to hear. So it just ends up being me doing what I want to hear.
Sure. And
making it how I want to hear it. And that's really the only way I can describe it. So it's not there's no formula there or anything like that. It's really just being there, wanting it to sound like this, being able to work with the band and to be able to get it to that point. So yeah, I don't know either. I mean, I don't think anybody knows. It's an art form. It's not really a science. So.
Sure, but it's weird that not weird, but it's interesting that you have that ear that just sort of seems to know. You know, when you were hitting hard and fast with, album after album after album every single year, you knew. It was clear that you knew that this was a record you could work, or this was a project that you could work with. And a lot of other guys, and maybe I'm wrong on this, let me just ask you that. Were you picky at all about your projects that you were working on? Did you listen to the demos and say, okay, this can work, or no, I can't polish this turd, or, were you picky?
The old turd polish. Well, yes, I was very lucky actually that I didn't, for the most part, I didn't have to do that much, but I did turn down a whole bunch of stuff that I probably shouldn't have turned down. I got the first Motley Crue cassette with 5 songs on it, and I thought it was total rubbish. Forget about it. And of course, they ended up being enormous. But
sure.
those things happen. But for the most part, I was very lucky that I didn't have to choose. And I was lucky that I could just pick stuff. And normally, throughout all the years, I've only picked stuff that I think that I can do something with. There's no point in hiring me. There's no point in me doing the job if I don't think I can bring something to it. So I don't take jobs for the money.
Sure.
I only take jobs when I can see the vision. And usually the vision is down to maybe one or two songs, like with Malice, for instance, License to Kill. What was the track on there? Oh yeah, Chain Gang Woman was a track on there that I listened to and I went, you know what? The way James staggered this vocal on the chorus, and I don't know if you know that song.
Yeah, I do.
That just it just made it for me. I was just like, you know what? This is great. I really like this. I can do, I can make this work. This works for me. So it's really just a matter of, if I thought I was a good fit, if I thought that I was going to bring something to it, then I would do the thing. Otherwise, I'd say, you know what? You probably got the wrong guy. You have to go with somebody else.
Sure. Were you ever? Obviously, you worked with some guys that were well known to be difficult, we'll say, and we'll start right from the beginning with Ozzy. I mean, Ozzy, you started working with Ozzy right after he left Black Sabbath for, basically being a drugged out mess is the way it was portrayed. Did you have to sit down with the band guys and learn them or meet them to decide if you wanted to work with people like that?
Ozzy actually is a really easy guy to work with, actually.
Okay.
So so there wasn't really any real trepidation about that, and I think that one of the things that happened with Blizzard of Oz was that everybody was new, and it was a new thing, and we didn't have a lot of time, so everybody was pretty much just going for it and making sure that everything worked,
Sure. What? So did you know Ozzy going in, or did you meet him as you went into the project?
No, I didn't know him at all. Actually, when he showed up, I thought he was the roadie. I didn't recognize him at all. Yeah, pretty bad.
That's funny. And then now, how was it? And I'm not trying to just narrow down to Ozzy, but I guess I'll ask more of an in general question. Is it different? Do you have you had experiences where, okay, maybe the musicianship is fantastic and you're feeling the music and you're feeling the right vibe, but dealing with the guys outside of the performance is really difficult, whether it's drugs or women or whatever that could get brought into the mix?
No, not really. For the most part, I've been very lucky like that. And of course, when you start to engineer and produce and work in the studio situation, you get very aware of interactions, and you get very aware of the moods that people are in. And obviously you want a good result, so you remain conducive. So you try not to exacerbate any bad situations.
Sure.
You always try and maximize a good situation. So I was very lucky, even with Dave Mustaine, who I'm sure you're going to ask me about. We really didn't have any, we really weren't at loggerheads about anything. I think that I approached it on a very professional level and tried to remain egoless, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you do that, it instills that on the artists as well, and they get into that whole thing about, okay, the record is the record is the thing.
Right.
So it's not about whether I like the headphones or whether I like this or that. It's really about making the best possible record, and that's always what I try to focus on. So you can, for the most part, I think with most artists, I think you can, as long as you continually focus on the end result, then ego takes a back step to that, takes a back seat. So fortunately, no, I didn't have too many things like that.
Okay. Well, you mentioned Dave Mustaine, and I have to imagine, and maybe it's just because I'm not in the world where I've ever worked on something that's that high profile, but you obviously did some work with on Rust in Peace, which if you ask metalheads will argue if that's the best or the second best record of all time of anything in the thrash metal world. But then you took the helm on the next one, on Countdown to Extinction, another great record. What did you feel pressure coming off of a record that was so highly regarded to bring more of yourself in and yet not change the formula?
Well, I think that you always there's always the one bane of the producer or engineer producer is self-doubt. Mm-hmm. So of course there's plenty of self-doubt. There's plenty of questioning that you do, with yourself. Am I doing the right thing? And of course there's quite a well-known story now that Dave sent me all this stuff for Countdown. And I had no idea, and I listened to it for days and days and days, and I was like, you know what? I have no idea what to do with this. And my only recourse was really just to keep listening and just to keep. And then after about day 4, I think that I said, you know what? That bit's kind of bugging me. That bit's too long. And this bit's really cool, so maybe we can work a little more with this bit. So I ended up, I think, on the 4th day, sitting in my apartment in Studio City. I wrote like about 4 or 5 pages of notes on each of the songs as I started to understand what was going on, and I sent him all these notes, and I didn't hear back for like a couple of days, and I thought, I've totally screwed it here.
Right.
The guy's obviously going to hate me, because I was fairly critical. And I was like, this is bullshit, just take this piece out.
Right.
This piece is way too long, And then I got a call from Dave, and my wife at the time, said, "Oh, Dave, Mustaine's on the phone." So I got on the phone, and he said, "I got your notes," and there was this big, long, pregnant pause, and I was like, "Oh my God," my heart sank. And he said, "I agree with about 98% of it," and so I was like, "Okay." And that was a big relief. And I think that, and people ask you, sometimes I do these symposiums and these lectures and stuff like that, where people ask you what the most important thing to do if you're a producer, what's the most important thing? And the most important thing, to my mind, is always to tell the truth.
Sure.
Always to tell it as you see it, not to be a yes man, and to stick to your guns. And you say, well, look, I don't like that part. I think that part could be better. So you guys try and figure out a better part. Maybe I got a better part, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. But you express the truth to them, and that goes beyond any kind of ego, any kind of nonsense. And people realize that I'm not doing this because I'm me. I'm not doing this because I want to impress my particular point of view on this.
Sure.
I'm doing this because I see this as a weak point, and I want to remove the weak points. It's sort of like Sherlock Holmes, where he says, where you've eliminated everything that's impossible, then you arrive at the truth. And that's really how I always work with stuff. Is look, it's stuff that I don't like, and the more I listen to it, the more I don't like something, the more I take it out, and that's really part of my production process. Is to remove stuff that I feel is inhibiting, the end product.
Sure. Now, since we're talking about Megadeth specifically right now, on Countdown, a lot of metal fans will argue, and I believe they're right in arguing it, that you captured the very best vocal sound Dave Mustaine ever did on a record. Before then, till then, after then, did you do something different with him vocally, or is that just where he was at the time, or what?
Well, at the time, and this is right around when Auto-Tune came out, but I didn't use Auto-Tune. I had a digital system that I could go in and actually manually manipulate the vocals and put them in tune. And I'd been doing this before with a couple other bands, Dangerous Toys and a few other bands. And I said to Dave, look, your vocals are pretty good, and they're working, but let's make them bang in tune. And not bang in tune like Cher,
right.
I believe. Not that kind of warbly, kind of crazy stuff, but let's just make them really in tune. Because I found at the time that when something's really in tune, it's infinitely more listenable. And I think that was one of the things that we did that helped Dave to get to another level. I think the feedback from that, when he listened and he realized what was going on, that it improved him. And so that whole process, I think, made a difference. And I think for the first time he saw himself as a real singer, as opposed to just like sort of, putting it out there, and getting by with it. Because actually Dave's not that great a singer, but he has this quality that is very valuable. And so that was really the whole point, was to try and maximize that. That's the producer's job, to try and maximize everything, to try and make everything more appealable, to try and make everything, better and better and better. So I think that that was an intrinsic part of that process. And also, I think we delved into a lot of stuff in a lot more detail. His vocals were comped a lot more excessively. We spent a lot more time making sure we had the right nuances. And actually, he didn't do a lot of performances. He would sing 4 times.
Okay.
So we would take the vocal 4 times. I'd say, okay, go home. And I would have copious notes, and I would chop and change, and I would move stuff around. And then when I had a decent comp with the required emotion,
mm-hmm.
then I would retune it and make everything like just a little bit better. So the good thing about being able to use that was that you could take an early take. You could take something that's really raw and has the, before he's like sung it a million times and then it's just like emotionless. You can grab something early on where before you would have said, okay, I really love this, but it's so out of tune I can't use it.
Right.
It just took that out of the picture. So I didn't have to worry about tuning. I say, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if you're in tune. Doesn't matter if, because we're going to fix that later on. What I want is the emotion and the rawness and the fresh take, the fast take. Like
right.
I think Clint Eastwood used to say, when he was in the films, they would say, okay, Clint, let's do another take. And he would say, was I in focus? And they say, yes. And he'd say, okay, let's move on. because he was a great believer in the first take, that fresh, that
sure.
first performance, that thing that happens before you start thinking about it. And that's still a very valuable thing to me, to be able to grab that, that freshness. And that's the same thing that happens, for instance, on the first 2 Ozzy records. Those records are just put down very, very quickly. There weren't a lot of takes, and the whole thing comes together very quickly, and you're not making any second guesses. You're going, yeah, that's fine, next. And these imperfections, like the early Led Zeppelin records, for instance,
sure,
where there's lots of mistakes. Jimmy Page is making every third note is a mistake, but they just move on, and you listen to it and you go, yeah, all these mistakes make it work. So there's a lot of that to it, So I think that with Countdown, and we did a lot of other things with Countdown. It's the first record that we did on Sony Digital. We had very accurate punch in, punch out. So with Marty, we were able to do window punches on his solos. So we were able to take a solo very early on, maybe the first or second solo that he played, and there would be a couple of blurs in there. And we would simply window punch those small blurs, might only be 100, 200 milliseconds, just a couple of notes, boom, pop those in, and boom, we're done, and we move on. So that whole technique was really pioneered with Countdown, and I think that's a lot of intrinsically a lot of what happened on that record, and that's probably what people are hearing. It's sort of the first Steely Dan heavy metal record, if you like, very clean, very accurate.
Right.
Although I just saw in Nick's book that he thinks there's a lot of, or he thought there's a lot of mistakes on that record, but even with the drums, Nick played those all the way through with no fills.
Right.
And then we would go back and we would engineer each fill. We would work out exactly what each fill had to be, and we would pop the whole kit in right 30 milliseconds before the kick, boom, come out right before the last kick, and we would go through and we would intrinsically engineer those fills. But the original track was still there with the feel. So it was a very advantageous way of doing it. It was a very interesting way of doing it.
No question. Now, Matt, I since we're deep into production right now, I have to ask you as a producer, and I'm going to ask you to reach back in your mind to 86, 87. What did you think? Because, you are well known for, as you were describing, touching things a little bit, but kind of working off of a more raw sound. Then you see Mutt Lange come around with Def Leppard with this unbelievably produced Hysteria, and I have to imagine for you're like, when you see it selling and selling and selling and selling, did that record or that style cause you to think, wow, maybe I need to rethink this to be better at my own craft?
Yeah, well, so that's a really good question, and you're correct that that really threw the cat amongst the pigeons as far as production, just as Steely Dan did a decade before that.
Sure.
And there was also a lot of pressure from, in those days, of course, you're working very closely with the label and you're working very closely with the A&R people, and I remember at that point, there's a lot of pressure from A&R people. Everybody was playing, Pyromania, and and saying, oh, look, how come it doesn't sound like this?
Right.
And your basic answer was, well, because you didn't give me $1 million budget,
Right.
But of course, that made a difference, and of course, production as a producer, you listen to what's going on, and you take input. And you go, yeah, I really like that. Fuck, that's a great. And you try and steal as much as you possibly can, like everything else.
Sure.
So certainly, and I think if you look if you look at 1990, where we made Lynch Mob is much more of a Mutt Lange production than Blizzard of Oz, for instance.
Sure.
So you try to incorporate these things, and you try to. But all the time it's running through your filter. So you're listening to it and going, yeah, I like this, or yeah, I don't like it, So you don't really know whether that's good or bad until you try it, and then you try it and you go, well, yeah, you know what, that's not really working. It's not really part of this. So it's always tempered with what's part of that record, what belongs in that record, and what doesn't belong in that record. And there are some artists that lend themselves towards that kind of production. And then there are other artists where it doesn't, So, certainly every big record that comes out that you hear makes a difference to every producer. And if they say that it doesn't, then maybe they're not listening to them, or maybe they're trying. But, for the most part, yeah, of course, you pay attention. You pay attention to what's popular. You pay attention to what you like, And, of course, Pyromania is a genius record. And, of course, one of the things that I learned from that was that Mutt Lange obviously listened to that record more times than anybody else on the planet. And by that token, he was able to remove anything that pissed him off. See, probably if you listen to the record 100 times, you're not going to hear anything that pisses you off. But he probably listened to that record maybe 1,000 times. So by the time he gets to 500, he's like, yeah, that bit's starting to piss me off now. Something that nobody else is ever going to get to, but he can get to it because he's paying attention, he's constantly listening, and he's submerging himself in the whole thing. So he's going, yeah, okay, finally I found something I don't like. Let me fix that. And I think that's a lot of production is, like I said before, is removing the negativity and when you've got rid of everything you don't like, you're left with everything you do like, the Sherlock Holmes thing.
Sure. Does it piss you off when bands, and I'll point to the obvious one, but there's been a lot of them that have done this, when bands remix and remaster your work? And I mean, the obvious ones are the Ozzy records with the, mixing in new people, as well to give it a completely different feel from what you did. But, I mean, Megadeth has remastered their records as well. Does that bother you as a producer? Because when you let it go, I'm sure you're not letting it go until you think, yeah, this is the fucking bomb.
Yeah, it becomes a fact of life. And for the most part, I think, once you've done your best with it, I think most producers or engineers will agree that they're just going to walk away. They don't want to listen to it anymore. They close the book on it.
Okay.
And if people want to mess with it, fine. Fortunately for most of the things that I've done, they've made a worse job of it. So, people are coming up and going, dude, it's totally rad. The first one is totally rad. Fuck that remix or fuck this, So that's kind of gratifying in a way. But you know what? It is the way of the world, and it doesn't upset me too much. I think Dave, for instance, on Euthanasia, he changed all the tempos and he redid everything, and he wasn't particularly happy with that record. And he, even with Countdown, I think he messed with that quite a lot too. And I'm not a big fan of doing that. I think it's fraught with peril. I remember talking to, oh God, this is a terrible story. I remember talking to my manager at the time, and he managed Rob Zombie. And I was talking to Rob at some club in LA many years ago, and he was going to remake, I think it was the Hitchcock movie that he remade.
Okay.
The one with, the one with the shower. And
yeah. Can't remember what it's
I
called.
looked at him and I said, "Don't do it." And he got very upset with me. I said, "What the fuck?" And he was doing it with what's his name, the big horror movie guy. And I said, "Don't do it." I said, "You're bound to lose. You're bound to lose. You're fucking with a classic. Move on. Do something else." And he got very upset with me and has never spoken to me since. But indeed, it was a fucking brick. And I told him it was a brick. I said, "Don't do it. You're wasting your time. It's gonna, if your career's not already dead by leaving White Zombie, it will be now. You can put all this on. He can send me tags or whatever. But to me, you don't do that. You don't try and remake classics. You don't fuck with it. You move on. You make something else.
Yeah.
To me, to rehash these things is it's just an exercise in futility, really.
Sure. Well, and part of the reason that it is a classic is what it was for the time period that it was done. To try and upgrade it to try and upgrade anything from analog to digital, or from a mix putting in more. That's like the big argument, and it's obviously not one of your records, but the big argument is still to this day, should they put the bass in the And Justice for All record? Well,
Metallica, yeah.
And it's the same thing. If they did, no one's going to like it. If they don't, people are going to complain about it. But most Metallica fans, anybody likes Metallica, generally likes that record. So why mess with it?
Yeah, it doesn't. It seems counterintuitive to me, and I mean, to me, it's the whole thing where, okay, if you read the book first, you don't like the film. If you see the film first, you don't like the book.
Right.
It's really what you've got at the time, and that's the baseline for you. And then when you hear some other version, it's like, it doesn't even matter if it's the same thing that's just been polished. It's just like, nah, I don't like that. I like the way it was. I remember that the Rolling Stones did a whole bunch of stuff. When digital first came out, they remastered a lot of Rolling Stones stuff on digital, and everybody hated it.
Right.
Because you could actually hear all the fuck-ups even clearer. and it was like, dude, this is like awful, you know. It was much better when it was kind of cloudy and fucked up, and it worked a lot better, and the atmosphere was a lot better. So, there's a lot of things when you make a record, when everybody's there. There's a lot of magic in the room. There's all these indefinables, these untangible things, and you catch that on 2-inch tape or even on digital. It doesn't really matter. But it's everybody's there at the time, and when you start to infringe on that, and you start to overdub and do stuff. I was called by Sharon to replace the bass and drums on Diary of a Madman and Blizzard of Oz, and I refused to do it. I said, look, there's no click track. I said, these are organic tracks. These tracks were put down, drums, bass, and rhythm. So if you try and, if you're going to try and reconstruct that, there's no way that you're going to get a better result. You're going to get a much more of a push and pull on the timing. You're going to have a lot of problems with it. And so I refused to do it, and then I got sued. but to me, it didn't make any sense to do that, because these are already, in my mind, these are already time capsules,
right,
of what happened at that time, and that to me is that intrinsic quality, that ineffable quality that's in there. That's something that you can't replace, and you can't engineer that. It's very difficult to try and, it's impossible really to try and capture that. I was talking to a couple of people in LA about this, a couple of producer friends of mine, about the problems with overdubbing and the fact that, okay, you got a, let's say, a very simple case, you got a bass and drummer, and they play this song. So at this point, you have a drummer responding to the bass player, and you have a bass player responding to the drummer. So there's a two-way conversation. There's 100% conversation between these two musicians.
Right.
Okay, so now you erase the bass, and you have another guy come in, you do the bass. So now this guy is only responding to the drummer. The drummer cannot respond anymore because he's not there. It's stuck on tape and it's fixed. So now you have a 50% conversation. Right. And music is all about conversation. It's all about the interaction between musicians. It's all about those nuances, those almost indetectable nuances, but very important. So now you've got a guy that's overdubbing the bass. So now you're only at 50% of the possible pathos or emotion that can happen. You can't get better than that because the drummer can no longer respond to the bass player. And then ad infinitum. Now you've got the bass and the drums, two different guys playing at two different times. And now you've got a guitar player, and you've got only 30% of the conversation because neither of these guys can respond to the guitar player. So as you go down, it gets more and more complex and more difficult to try and make this an intrinsic performance, because it becomes less of a performance. It becomes a sort of a rote, I'm playing the right part. Mm-hmm. So we had a very interesting conversation about that, and that's my particular theory about it, is that the conversation between musicians gets less and less. And I find that all of these remixes and all of this kind of thing just move you further away from the event. Sure. And really what you're looking at is, you're looking at the event. You're not looking at a NASA reconstruction of the event. This is what it would look like to land on Mars. You want to see what it actually is landing on Mars or landing on the moon, or any of these things. Sure. You know what I'm saying? So, so that to me is a very dangerous thing, and I think people don't pay that much attention to that. They think it's okay. Well, he's playing the right parts.
Sure.
But that's not really what it's about. That just him playing the right parts is not music. It's
No, you're right. And so with that said, when you take on a project, no matter who it is, and especially keeping the communication piece in mind, do you consider yourself to be, that fifth member of the band that is a part of that communication, that is the conduit of all of that communication to keep it, more or less like to keep the glue to the paper, so to speak?
Well, it's a good question, and I think to a certain extent you do. To a certain extent, okay. So one of the things that you do as a producer, you try to control very closely the amount of conversation that's going on in the studio. Mm-hmm. You try to control very closely the sequence of events. Try to make sure that everything is everything is done in the right order. You keep very tight control on everybody, and that's a little bit hard to do, especially if you have big egos and stuff like that. But you impress upon people, look, this is the way we're going to do it. Nobody's going to make any decisions. I'm going to make decisions, okay? You can come and talk to me. We can do, it's like the old trick about the running order of the album,
right?
What the old joke was. Okay, you go to each member of the band, you go, all right, why don't you give me your running order on a piece of paper? And you get each member of the band to give you the running order, and you throw them all in the bin and you use your own running order. So, but they all think, and they look at your running order and they go, oh, yeah, it's not my running order, but he did do this.
Right.
Or he did do that, So it's very much it's a little bit of a bait and switch, and you have to do a little bit of manipulation, not too much manipulation, but you have to do a little bit of manipulation, because you're the observer, you're the objective person, mm-hmm. and it's your job to be objective, and it's your job to be truthful. So you go, okay, look, that ain't working. This is working. This is what we're going to do, And so long as you keep a handle on it, and so long as you allow ideas, and so long as people understand, and there's a lot of trust going on. You've got to make sure that people trust you. You've got to make sure that people understand that you're a musical person. You're not doing this just to fuck them up,
right?
Or just I like your wife, so I'm just gonna, your solo is gonna be shitty. It's none of that stuff going on.
Right.
You're saying, listen, I think it's the best thing for the record. Period. That's it. No other fucking motive. I'm not, you might hate me, but you won't hate the record. Okay?
Right.
And when people realize that you're doing that and you're actually kind of sacrificing yourself a little bit, and you're saying, you know what, this guy's being a dick, but he's probably right, then that trust gets established, and they're able to relax. It's like, okay, now I can just play. I don't have to worry about, did I sing this right? Did I play this right? This guy's going to tell me, mm-hmm. and I trust the guy. He knows what he's doing. He's going to tell me if it sucks. He's going to tell me if it's great. Blah blah blah.
Sure.
So try and establish that pattern. So in that sense, it's kind of a fifth part of the band, but it's actually sitting a little outside of the box and sitting a little over the box and saying, look, okay, yeah, I'm part of the band. I'll buy the next round, but when it comes down to what goes on the record, if I don't like it, ain't going on.
Right.
That's that's kind of the,
Right.
So you got to be a bit of an arsehole, but at the same time, you got to let people understand. Look, I'm not being an arsehole because I want to be. I'm being an arsehole because I think this is the best way to go.
Sure.
So once people understand that, I don't think it never seemed to be a problem to me.
Sure.
Once people understood that, then it was like, okay. So had very few problems with arrangements or changing parts or any of that kind of stuff, because people go, all right, I'm digging it.
Right.
And of course, you're going to get called out on it. People are going to say, well, that part sucks. And you go, okay, yeah, it probably does. But, you got a better one? You got a better one? We'll put it in.
Right.
Everybody gets a choice. Everybody plays again, as fucking, the Grinch said, whatever it was. So, basically you try every trick in the book. You use everything you can to make the best possible record. And and once people understand that that's what you're doing, you get very little backlash on it. There's not a lot of splash going on,
Right. Since we're in this mode, it just makes me think of one that I have to think was difficult, and maybe not, because you obviously worked with these guys several times, but how did you get your points across with a band like Loudness? you know, because obviously there's a language barrier there that gets mixed into this mix as well. I mean, did that make working with them, or maybe even just maybe the first time, even harder because of the language difference?
Well, it was a little bit hard. I think, the hardest thing there was to try and get Mickey to sing without a Japanese accent.
Right.
You know, lock and lock, lazy nights, you know, and all that stuff. But actually, it's not that difficult because you're not talking English or Japanese, you're talking music, and it's a universal thing. And we were doing, like, Heavy Chains, for instance, that we did. And I was talking to Noguchi, R.I.P. Noguchi, but I wanted him to break this rhythm up. So I said, look, I hear, instead of just this straight thing, I hear you going into these cross rhythms. And it was, you know, and I'm like, and I couldn't explain it, of course, in Japanese, and he didn't speak any English. So I would just basically kind of sing it to him.
Right.
He'd be like, okay, I get it. And he would change, you know, so then he would go into cross third time and, you know, up, down, you know. So it was fairly easy, actually, to be able to tell people, because you're not talking, you know, it's everybody speaks that language
right
in the room. So it's really not that hard. The only thing, of course, with foreign singers, or, you know, if they're going to sing English or American, whatever. But that's really the hardest thing is to lose the accent. And, you know, we have the same problem with Swedish players, and all those Swedish much better at doing American accents. But, you know, that's really the hardest thing. It's not so much the arrangements, and not so much the playing. And Akira, of course, is a great guitar player, and we worked on a couple of things, and I would find a couple of places where he was kind of doing a different move on the fretboard, so there was a little slur. And I sat there one day, and we were sitting in the studio, and I said, look, maybe what you can do is you can change your fingering right here to smooth that part. And I mean, me telling Akira Tagasaki how to play guitar is like fucking preposterous.
Right.
You know? And people never believe me when I say this, but I said to him, hey, maybe you got to move here, like 3 notes before, and then you're in the right place to move across this smoother. And he's like, huh? And he sat there for a few minutes, and then he moved, and he goes, okay. So just a little thing, you know, there's little things, but, you know, it's really the objective and the subjective, you know, and people are used to hearing things a certain way, and it's very difficult to judge yourself. So it's much better to have somebody else go, yeah, it's better if you do it this way. And they're like, well, sounds the same to me, but if you say it's better, then fine.
Right.
You know, so you know, there's some of that going on also, you know. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it is really the fact that you're outside the box looking in, and that you can give them a value judgment that is really a judgment, and not some kind of like, oh, you know, I like it better because, you know, your girlfriend smiled when you did it, or, you know,
right,
some crazy stuff, you know. So that's really what it's down to, and it's really down to trying to remove the ego from the situation, and trying to remove the you know, that sort of closed in, you know, thing, mm-hmm. where everybody's just looking, you know, oh, this is how I always do it, you know. It's a question of pushing people outside the box and pushing people into a place where they may be a little less comfortable, but where they're going to make something that's a little more dangerous and a little more exciting, you know.
Sure. Now, Max, I don't know this to be true, but I'm going to make an assumption, and this is an assumption based on Wikipedia.
It's true.
So you know, there's good odds that it's not true, but it just seems like you were like at least one of the hot producers throughout the 80s into the 90s. Grunge hit, and you went away. You know, that you just kind of stopped. Was that Was that because you weren't feeling that kind of music? Was it just the business changed and you were considered the old guard? What was it that stopped you right around 90, 3 or 4 or something in there from being the, on 10 records a year?
I think all of those things. I mean, it was a massive paradigm change in the music. There's a massive paradigm change in the record companies. Online stuff was starting to happen. I had young children, so there's a whole bunch of stuff that sort of was a conflagration that came together, and so I said, you know what, I'm just going to stop doing this for a while because. I didn't particularly. I mean, I like grunge. I had no problem with the, super, the super. What's her name and Kurt Cobain and all these guys. But it's not particularly stuff that I would do, and it's not particularly stuff that I would be any good at. If there was those kind of records, I probably would not. If I'd been offered them, I probably wouldn't have done them. So it all became very. Was fractured at that point from all of the whole metal thing throughout the 80s and the early 90s, as you say. So at that point, I just said, you know what, I'm going to bow out for a while. I'm going to watch my kids grow up. I'm going to spend some time with the family and just get away from all that kind of stuff. And now, of course, everything seems to be coming back.
Sure.
Which is pretty interesting. So now, apparently, I'm a legend, which I had no idea. So I'm the legend, which is like preposterous. But, it took, I guess, that 10 or 15 years for all the people that bought the Ozzy Osbourne records to get to a point where they had money to buy more records. I don't know what happened. But, now everywhere I go, people are like, wait a minute, didn't you do? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, dude, that's my, and I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. We didn't know at the time, we just made the best record we could. But, you don't know at the time when you're making those kind of records. You make the best record you can. And I was very lucky to be in the right place at the right time for those records. And, much more luck than judgment, believe me.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't think really, if it really boils down to it, I don't think that I made better records than anybody else. I was just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and everything kind of fell together. So I don't give myself any kudos for Blizzard of Oz or Diary of a Madman or Bark of the Moon or Lynch Mob or any of these things.
Sure.
I just did the best job I could, and I think that there's probably 20 other guys that could have done the same thing. Really.
Well, yeah, maybe, but at the same time, if you pick the big names from that era, and that'd be, yourself, of course, Mutt Lange, Michael Wagner, et cetera, that, if you pick...
I'm very pleased you mentioned me in the same sentence as Mutt Lange, because I think he's fucking fantastic.
Dude.
And, of course, Michael's a friend of mine, and Michael and I basically made the same records for many years.
Well, but Michael has a different sound than you do. A Michael Wagner record definitely does not sound like a Max Norman record. And I doubt that it's purposely that way. It's just he has a different ear and a different talent for pulling different things out of his bands. If you listen to, I don't know, Skid Row or something, I don't think you would have pulled the same thing out of Skid Row.
Well, we were both there with Skid Row.
Okay.
We were both up for the same gig, and actually the management had both of us there at the same time. And I'm looking at Michael, and he's looking at me, and like, oh, you're here. I'm like, yeah, you're here. We're both like, all right, well, whatever, whoever gets it, gets it, So he ended up getting that one. I was actually, right there with him. So
right.
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, but
I don't know how that decision went down, but But yeah, I would have made a different record. I love those guys. I love Sebastian and all that stuff. But I probably would have made a different sounding record. Probably would have had the same result though. You know, because a lot of it is really not down to the sound of the record. A lot of it is really down to, I mean, of course it helps, but a lot of it is down to the songs. You know, if they got the songs, they got the songs. And if they ain't got the songs, then you don't do the record, you know.
Sure. Who and living or passed away, who do you wish you would have had the chance to work with that you didn't?
Well, just recently, it's just at his interment, Ralph Santalo from Iced Earth and Dareside and a bunch of like that down from in Land O'Lakes down in Florida. I was just starting to work with Ralph, and then he passed away shortly after. He's one of the guys that I would really have loved to work with.
I always thought Pantera would have been one of those that you would have really done some damage with.
Well, I'll tell you the story about Pantera. I did Lynch Mob instead of Pantera. I had the Pantera gig, the Cowboys from Hell. Derek Shulman sent me down to Texas. He said, I got this band, I want you to go and see him. He was with ACO at the time. He called me up, he said, you know, go down and see this band, tell me what you think. So I went down and see him, and the hair stood up on the back of my neck. I was like, what the fuck? This is like unbelievable shit. So, and I hung out with the guys, and we got drunk and everything. We hung out, and then I came back and I said, I don't know what to tell you. They're fucking great. You know? So, and I said, but I'm not doing a record unless I have management, which I didn't have. So I called my manager, Andy Gould, and said, hey, I got this band, Pantera. Why don't you manage them? So he goes, okay. So he managed them. He went back to Derek, said, okay, I'll manage Pantera. So Derek said, okay, we're on, you know, let's do it. And then he wanted to do it down in his studio down in Texas. And I didn't want to work down there because it was a pretty funky studio. And at the same time, I was getting calls from George to do this new Lynch Mob thing.
Right.
And it really came to sort of a toss of the coin. And it was a slightly better economic situation with George. And I saw a little more possibilities with Lynch Mob. Of course, it was the wrong decision. I should have done Cowboys from Hell, of course.
Right.
But then it ended up being my friend Terry Day who did it. So fine, because Terry did a great job, and you know, it's fantastic, and that's history. You know, so there's lots of forks in the road where you end up taking the wrong fork. But you know, hindsight is 20/20. So you know, you don't know at the time, and yeah, it's one of the few regrets that I didn't do that and work with Dime and Vinny and you know all those guys. It is a regret, but you make a decision, and that you know you have to stand by it. So what can you do? And instead, I made a Wicked Sensation, which I think is a great record. So
sure.
That's a good consolation prize for me. You know?
Sure, no question. What about Metallica? Do you ever wish that you would have had an opportunity to especially? I'm curious about a specific record. I'll ask the question: Do you wish you would have ever had the opportunity? But do you wish you would have had the opportunity for the big one, for the Black Album?
Well, funnily enough, we were making Lynch Mob at 1-on-1 in North Hollywood, and Bob Rock showed up with Lars, and I got a call in the studio. We were doing some overdubs at the time, and I got a call in the studio and said, "Oh, Bob Rock's here. He wants to look at the studio." I said, "Well, he's going to have to wait because I'm in a session." So they were like, "Oh, okay." And then they called like 10 minutes later. Look, Bob, he doesn't have a lot of time. You know, can he get in? And I said, "No, he can't." I said, "I'm in a session. I'm paying for the room. Tell him to fucking wait. You know, that's the way it is." So anyway, after about 10 minutes, somebody came in and was like, "Dude, you know, come on, man." And I'm like, "You motherfuckers." So anyway, so Bob comes in with Lars, and I'm kind of looking daggers at him, and I'm looking at Bob because it's up until now, Bob's never really been doing anything in that genre.
Right.
I actually said to Bob, I said, "A bit of a stretch for you, right, Bob?" because I was kind of pissed off with him for fucking with me.
Right.
And he just kind of gave me this look like, you know, and Lars was like, you know, and I was like, you know what? You just fucked me in the middle of the session. Come on, man. I would never do that to anybody. It doesn't matter how big I was, how small they were. I would never interrupt anybody's session. But he felt that he was big enough to be able to do that. It's Metallica. We're the fucking gods, you know, whatever it is. So after that, no. Did I want to do a Metallica record? Yeah, maybe to fuck it up. But no, I don't really want to, you know. And I don't need to deal with idiots like, okay, Bob's not an idiot. He's a good guy. But, you know, and I don't, Lars maybe not so much. But, you know, that's to me, that's just fucking rude. And I don't like that. And it kind of pissed me off. So I don't really care about Metallica, actually. And anyway, as soon as they made that record, they were fucked anyway.
Yeah, it kind of didn't. I mean, they sold a lot, but
yeah, it's a great record, but it's a pop record, so you know.
Yeah, well, and they gave away their integrity to get the fame.
I think that's generally how everybody looks at it. Yeah.
Yeah, no question. Well,
I mean, I don't mean to be venomous about it, but you know, I'm still kind of pissed off about that.
I bet. Well, yeah. I mean, you know what? I mean, looking back at it, sure, Metallica was Metallica, but they weren't the biggest band in the world. Metallica at that point either. They were a big band, but they were not the biggest band in the world. And you might have. I think
it was right after Bob had Dr. Feelgood came out.
Okay.
That was like a real big fucking record. So and now at this point, Bob's like, you know, the big I am. So you know, I think that was part of the process.
Okay, but that doesn't trump your. I mean, if you want to go time for time, at that point you had what? Rust in Peace, all of the Ozzy stuff, Y&T. You had quite an assortment of records yourself. You had the absolute right to be like, hey, dude, fuck you. Get out of my studio.
Yeah, well, basically, yeah. But, you know, eventually I caved in and they came in, you know, looked at it and everything. But, you know, whatever. It is what it is, you know. And I ended up being sort of, you know, okay, whatever.
I hear you, man. Well, Max, this has been unbelievably fun for me as a fan of your work, and we could do this for 3 more hours because I have just tons and tons of stuff. Maybe we'll do it again at some point, but the way I want to end this is with something that you said that you don't believe is I will absolutely say that you're a legend in the business. You know. It's hard if you pull up this list. I just pulled it up online and just look at the records that you've done: Blizzard of Oz, Diary of a Madman, Speak of the Devil, Bark at the Moon, all these Coney Hatch records, Savatage records, Loudness, Armored Saint, Lizzie Borden, Dangerous Toy, Death Angel, Lynch Mob, the obvious Megadeth records. All right, if you were a fan of the 80s, that's your collection. I would bet I just read off 20 names. I'll bet you at least 5 are in every Metalhead's collection on this planet.
I guess so. And I'm very happy about that because at the time I was just trying to make the best possible record, and I just hoped, really my only hope was that people got it.
Sure.
People got all the little nuances. They got the vibra slap, you know, that was on almost every record that I did. You know, they got the little tweaks and things that we did, just as a, like that one fan out of 1,000 would hear and understand. You know, so it's very edifying to me that people got it and that people liked it, and hey, you know, a slave to the music. You know, so. You do the best you can, and you hope that it's good enough, and you hope that you're being true to what that artist wants and what the music is, and that's really it. I mean, certainly not a legend.
Well, we'll just disagree. We'll agree to disagree on that one, man.
If I was a legend, I'd be dead.
Well, I'll tell you what, man. Why don't we end this with what I think is the most recent release that you put out? Why don't we end this with something from Red Dragon Cartel's Patina record, which is you may have gone away and then come back, but you came right back with the same production sound, and you captured another great record, man.
Well, thanks. Yeah, that was. It took a little while to put that together. All I did was the mix on that. I didn't do any of the production, any of the music work or anything. It took a while to get that mix, and I wanted it to have a certain something. I wanted it to have some difference so that you could hear any 10 seconds of that record and know what record it was.
Right.
And fortunately. And that's the first time I met Jake for 30 years, and it was just like the day before yesterday that I'd seen him last, so we just got on with it, and he was very good, and it was all done kind of remotely. I mixed it here, and would send stuff out, and it would come back, and he was very good, and he was very, very astute about what he wanted with the guitars, about where he wanted them, how loud, how soft, all the different parts, which was great because he has a million guitar parts on there.
Sure.
But he makes it sound really simple, and I thought he did an excellent job. And Anthony Esposito, of course, was producing, and his son was engineering, and I think they did a really good job. So really, as a mix, I like the mix, and like I said, I was just trying to make it eclectic enough that it would have some kind of sonic signature, and I got a lot of backlash originally for the drum sound, and they wanted it to be retro, and I wanted it to be retro, but I also wanted it to be nouveau retro, if you know what I mean. So we ended up with what I think was a decent record, yeah. So I think they did a great job, and all kudos to them. I was very lucky that they allowed me to mix it. So, yeah, it worked out good. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem, man. Well, let's play a little bit of it right now. This is Crooked Man from Red Dragon Cartel right here on your Classic Metal Show. You've always wanted a way to support the Classic Metal Show. Well, now you've got a way. With the Classic Metal Show subscription service, you can rent or buy the in-studio video episodes of the Classic Metal Show featuring Neely and Chris Aiken. You can also subscribe to our monthly service, which grants unlimited access to all current and archived in-studio videos. Your subscription will allow viewing on most devices, including iOS, Android, Roku, Chromecast, and most smart TVs. Visit www.vimeo.com/on-demand/CMS Studio and support the Classic Metal Show by starting your Classic Metal Show subscription today.